All right, so every once in a while you're going to need some cloth that is not colliding. You're going to need something more than a tablecloth, and something more than a cloth hitting a torus or a box or a ball. So a lot of times, in my experience, I'm going to need a flag or I'm going to need an effect of a flag. And that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to animate a flag, and I'll show you what I mean. By adding just a plane here, we're going to change that to the positive z. Okay, and then we're just going to stretch that out a little bit, probably about like there. And let's increase the segments a little bit, just so they're square. Okay. Then we're going to make that a polygon object, and we're good to go there. All right, so if we take a cloth tag, we'll right click, put cloth on there, hit the play button. Okay, that gravity automatically just affects it. And we have nothing with it to collide to, so what do? Come up here to your selection. You can use a rectangular selection if you want. And in point mode, just select over a couple of rows of points there. And if you don't get them right, just go ahead and reselect those. Doesn't necessarily matter if you get one row, two, or even a portion of, but just try and get them from all the way top to down. Okay. When those are selected, go back over here to your cloth tag, go to dresser, and down under fixed points, hit set. And you can see they turn purple. Hit the play button again, and cloth is working. What I've always told people in Lightwave training, Moto training, Cinema 4D training, make sure you just do one thing at a time. Okay, don't just add this, click this, change this, and then hit the play, because you might not know exactly where something went wrong, or by the same token, where something went right. Okay, so doing one thing, hitting play, I can see how that's affected. And while it might take a little more time, in the long run, you're going to come out ahead. So if I make this 250 frames, and we'll just stretch that out, we can sit here and actually play with these settings and see them happen in real time, which is really nice. Let's go back here to the forces. Now we have gravity of negative 9.8 automatically, and it gives it a really nice swing and a bounce, but it is crossing through itself. So I'm going to show you that first. Go to the Expert tab, and there's self-collision. If you turn that on, things start to really slow down. And naturally, that's because it's now calculating itself. It's still going to kind of cut into itself a little bit. It will fold, and we don't have a ton of geometry here, but this is where we'd probably add a hyperNURBS at the end so that actually all those little folds and creases will be really nice and tight. Okay. You can also increase the subsampling so that it's even calculating a little bit more. All right, but we're going to keep that all at default of 3 and self collision off just for the time being. Okay. And like earlier I showed you, you can, if you stop this, rewind, calculate the cache, it will just do a render of it. Well, it'll actually process, not so much a render. It'll internally render, not visually. And once that's processed, you can then actually play it back in real time. So we'll hit stop that. And now that's actually playing more in real time based on our cache. It's not calculating every time we play. Okay, but we're going to keep it pretty simple for the time being. So we'll just hit empty cache. Let's go back down to forces. Let's put some wind on. Okay, and I'm just going to hit the play button so you can actually see what's happening here. Going to put some wind on. Maybe about 5 meters or so. Something like that. Doesn't look like anything's happening because we need some strength for the wind. And it's actually pretty powerful. You don't need too much. And you can see as I change this, there's wind just pushing this right down the X. Okay. So X is the red, positive to the right. If I want to push it the other way, let's go negative. Now we're whipping it around the other way. Okay. You can put some to the Y, so it pushes up. We're going to go back on the X. And I actually like to put a little bit on the Z as well. And the reason is so that it's not just blowing from one direction. It gives it a gusty kind of turbulence, which I like. Now there is turbulence down here, which makes kind of the wind break up, if you will. But I just like a little wind on the Z. I always have. So I always put that a little bit there because it kind of pushes it this way. And with that extra push, it also gives it a nice little extra flap. Okay. So with that alone, it's working really well. But I think I'm going to just bring the gravity not so strong. And yes, 9.8 meters is real world gravity, but This isn't the real world. This is the computer. So no matter what the values say, you still got to have something that works correctly for your scene. And in this particular case, we're doing pretty well. Okay, so with a little less gravity. So for the most part, that's actually working really well. But let me show a few more things you can do. Let's put a little more turbulence on, and look what happens. It just goes nuts. Okay, don't have to even change this very much at all. Works pretty well. And maybe just one, turbulence of one. And then you can change the speed on the turbulence. You can put some drag on there, but I do a global drag and watch what happens. If you don't like this flapping so much, put the drag on there. Okay? And that's going to stiffen that out a little. And that's just a replay right there. And what you can do for that, let's do this. Let's say about frame 100, it's actually where you want. Do minus 100 in here. And let's put this to 350 and drag that out. Okay. So that way at minus 100 it's starting, and when it gets to 0 it's already in play. It's not starting out at its default spot. Okay, it's starting out at minus 100, so when you start rendering at frame 0, and if you cache this like this, it will generate that. So those first 100 frames where you wouldn't actually render, you'd start your final render at frame 0, the flag is already in motion. And you can do this with anything in your scenes. Just give it a negative keyframe. So it's almost like a pre-roll. It's kind of like a running start. Now if we rewind and hit play, you can see right at 0, it's starting to work just fine. So just a little extra tip there. But let's clear that out, empty cache, and then let's just keep that play button going. Collision's off. Let's go back to forces. Okay, so all of this is working okay. We got some wind direction on the X. Got some gravity, a little less. If we go back to the tags, you can work with some of these values here. Here's the stiffness. Okay, and if you increase some of these values, the stiffness in the rubber, what you can end up with is something more like a sail you'd have on a ship. So what if you had pinned the other side there? Go like this. Take these points, take the selection, take these points, dresser, set. Okay, and now we'll rewind, calculate again, and now that's just floating around in there. So you have the sail of a ship. You know, a banner hanging from, a storefront. A little sign. Okay, so it's not always just about flags. It's about all these kind of cloth-like things you could put in your scene and just have some turbulence going and just, a drape on a window, a bedspread, things like that. Okay, so the cloth in here is really simple to set up. It actually renders really well. And what's really nice about this is that if you add a material, and I want you to think about this in terms of your video production. Okay, and I'm just going to load up our Rust picture here. So original. And I'm going to drop that on there. Okay, and let's just kind of go up here in the middle. And actually, let me play this a little bit. And let's put some more force on here. Select that tag again, and let's bring the stiffness, bring all these back down a little bit so we have a little more play in there. And then for the forces, I'm going to increase more wind on the Z. And then a little more on the negative Y, so it droops a little. Yeah, something like that. Okay, and we got like a sail. So if you had animating a sailboat out on the ocean, I'm going to zoom in and do a render. That would actually just render out just like that, which would be great. Of course, you could put a logo on there, and now you've got a pocket of wind for your sailboat just by playing with the stiffness and some of those values. All right, so if you work in video production, work in photography like I do, and you want to be a lot more dynamic with your slideshows, how about rendering out a couple of your images like this? I've done it for years, and I've rarely ever see slideshows where people put renders of 3D images in. You just map it on there, do a few seconds of a render and do a transition. Maybe copy this, put a few of these in your scene with different images, and you set up your camera so that it just renders and passes through one or passes by one, goes to the next, goes to the next. I did something similar like this years ago with billboards, and we put a number of different images and moving images on billboards in 3D. And it's just a whole different way to present your images rather than your typical slideshow or video presentation. It's great for openings for your videos and so on. So it takes you a lot farther than just animating a flag. It's cloth, it's drapes, bedspreads, and even ways you can present your existing renders, images, and videos. So let's move on to the next video.